pleasure to be here with you, and thank you everybody for your flexibility and coming back this week after we had to cancel last week. I'm joining you from Northeast Pennsylvania today. I'm based in New York City and Manhattan and travel back and forth, and last week blew a tire on my way out here, so that was the trouble. But glad to be here and to see almost 80 people on the line, and we will have a conversation. I want to share some thoughts with you to stimulate your thinking, and then really be able to answer your questions and take it where it's of interest to you, this topic. So as the Dean said, I'm an organization designer. For 20 years, I've had a firm, Cates Kessler with a partner, 15 people, boutique firm, just helping organizations, mostly big, complex global companies, think about the shape of their organization to get strategy done. But we work with nonprofits, we work with government agencies, and we have done some university work as well with NYU and the New School up in New York City. So what I'm coming to you with is what we see as sort of universal across organizations, not specific to the college environment, but really general to the challenges of organizing human beings into groups to get complex work done. So let me get started here and talk about what is our agenda for today, and I want to cover 4 things. One is to give you an overview of this concept that we call lateral connections. How do you design the connections and the linkages across the units in your organization? We'll talk about some examples and benefits, behavioral best practices, and leave plenty of time for questions along the way. Okay, so let's get started with this idea of team identity. So we look at the lens that we can look at organizations through, we can look at sort of 4 different lenses. We can look at the individual, and have we enabled the individual to do their work? Do they have the skills? Do they have the development? We can assess them, coach them, and help them. We can think about teams, how people come together in small groups, and a team could be 5 or it could be 50. We can think of organizations as teams of teams that we bring together, get different perspectives, different focus, and work to get bigger, more complex strategies done. And then, of course, we all sit in a larger system that impacts. And what we know about human beings is that team identity is very important. There was some really interesting research some time ago that said there's basically 150 people that we can really know and have a relationship with. And if you know the company W.L. Gore, you might know Gore-Tex. It's a very innovative company with a very specific culture. And Bill Gore, when he founded the company, was very struck by this, and he limited the size of all of his plants to 150 people based on the premise that that's what we can get to know. More recently, Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, has popularized the term a 2-pizza team. And the kind of idea there is the ideal size of a work group is about maybe 8 to 10 people, depending on the size of your pizza and how hungry. But the idea that we, as human beings, no matter how much technology we are afforded, we have not evolved any in the last 50 years in the way we process information, in the way that we work together. So that we have to be really cognizant in big, complex organizations that we have to start off with thinking about the team. So the first thought here is that people like to be on a team. They want to have a stable home base at work. So in the university, you have an identity with the University of Texas, with the College of Natural Resources, and then with a department. And you might also have an identity with a functional expertise, procurement, human resources, finance, IT. And the reality is that we have to and do belong to many communities beyond our formal group, whether that's the department, our function, our professional identity, or maybe even a location. We identify with a site or a building or a campus. Some of these connections happen, to occur naturally. But from an organization design point of view, we look and say, why leave them to chance? So here's a little basics about org design. The first thing we want to do is group people together into that core home team that makes the most sense. Now, universities, that has been for a very, very long time the department, right? The English department, the mathematics department, the government department, and such. When we've worked with universities, the challenge to that is that from even an academic point of view, the world's problems that we're trying to solve, the jobs that we are preparing students for, don't really fall neatly into those departments. Digital marketing spans marketing and finance and IT, right? Biostatistics spans computational statistics and IT and biology. And so many of you, I'm sure, are aware of how do we get those pieces to work together and still keep the expertise that comes from sitting in our home. You might have heard about silos. Silos are bad in organizations. In fact, silos are good. They create focus. But when we want to create more than one community, we actually have to design those connections across, because those silos that create focus, our department, right, also create boundaries and barriers. We just may not even know who's sitting in another organization. So how do we do that? We use something we call the ladder of lateral connections. And it's kind of a toolkit that you can think about applying to different situations. So let me just set up what the picture looks here. So you have two axes, and on the vertical axis is difficulty of management. And so when we say difficulty, we mean complexity. This is going to take time. Maybe it takes some money. Maybe it takes some management or oversight, or it takes administrative support to make something happen. But on the horizontal axis is strength of connection. So as we go up, it becomes more complex to make this connection work, but we also are wiring things strongly together. All right, I'm going to take you through these four, and what I'm going to ask you to think about while I'm talking is to think about examples for each of those that you have at the university. Okay, and I'm going to ask for a few people to share. So giving you a heads up, there's going to be sharing in a couple of minutes. Need to get a few thoughts here. But let me give you the theory of the case first. So the idea is at the bottom of the ladder is what we would call lateral communities. And you might have heard of these as communities of practice. In many ways, this is really this is really what we call sort of interpersonal networks, high trust working relationships. This is the social capital that we know makes all organizations work. Let's take an example. I'm going to work you through one. I know one of the groups that you're creating lateral communities around is procurement. And this is, you know, in the corporate world, procurement is one that also is very popular for thinking about how do we design these lateral connections across. We want to first save money and use our size and scale to negotiate with vendors and get better pricing. We want to share our expertise and talent and insights that sit in our procurement professionals. We want to create a professional community for learning. So this is a big opportunity around efficiency, effectiveness, and development. So if we think about a lateral community, it's at the bottom of this kind of continuum because it's the easiest. It's a light touch. It's about bringing people together first just to know one another. Hey, I didn't know you were doing that. What's your experience? Have you worked with such and such a vendor? How have you managed? Have you had trouble with them? What have you found in such and such a product area that works best? Just informal, share information. If we find something to connect on and make a better decision, it's a win. And really all we need to do to create these lateral communities is to create a forum, create a space for people to come together and support them a bit. We'll talk later on what kind of support. But we can have lateral communities around anything. In many organizations, we have employee resource groups around shared affinities or identities. We have groups around sports or maybe book clubs. And the idea is that we can bring people from across different silos into a shared space where they have a common interest, and those connections will help weave the organization together, right? Create stronger fabric that can be activated and mobilized if we need that later on. All right, let's take a step up. Management processes and routines. This is essentially the formalization of the informal lateral communities. So staying with our procurement example, we might say that, you know what, instead of just having people get together and chat and see what they come up with, we are going to actually charter them. We're going to have a quarterly meeting, and we're going to ask them to make recommendations on some high value purchases. So the difference here is where the lateral community is, hey, find a good idea, completely optional if you participate. A management process is, we are bringing together everybody who does procurement, and we are going to create an outcome that we want them to participate in, right? It's a little more complex. We have to have time, we have people, commitment, and then we also have to do some more preparation around what's the problem to solve, what does good look like, and what are the tools they're going to use. We can take another step up and say, wow, these quarterly meetings are so great. We're coming up with big ideas. And in fact, the rest of the university is saying, wow, natural resources is, you know, they're working together beautifully. That maybe, for instance, the university says, hey, let's create a cross-department or cross-college team, and we're going to ask people to spend 20% of their time for the next 3 weeks. We're going to actually invest their time. So this is why we're moving it up in complexity, to really come up with a new policy around X, Y, and Z, right? So a formal team has a charter. How well you do on it might impact some of your performance management or your performance achievement. There's an investment of the organization's time into this. So this is not, you know, let's meet for an hour every month kind of, you know, lunchtime. This is actually putting work time into this. And then finally, all the way up at the top is the most complex, which is a matrix. And here we have dual reporting, in which our procurement people might report into the chair of a department, but also into a head of procurement for the college or then onto the university. And the idea here is, through dual reporting and matrix management, we're going to get both responsiveness to the particular needs of a department. Well, this department buys lab equipment, that department doesn't. But we're also going to be able to drive consistency around purchasing, guardrails, boundaries, big investments, and et cetera. Okay, let me get natural sciences. I'm sorry, I've been saying natural resources, natural sciences. Thank you for that. My apologies. I just got a call out. Hey, let's just take a few minutes. If I could get a hand up. For maybe some other examples that you have anywhere along this continuum. Yes, Maria Allen.
So I see this in I'm in development for College of Natural Sciences and for one of the units. So I see this as like a casual sort of passing the hall. It's like, hey, we're doing this X, Y, and Z. What do you think? Do you know anybody who would be willing to, you know, support it? But then I also work on very formal proposals on behalf of either the college and or the entire university. So I see this as the lateral communities just being within my own unit and just kind of talking about, yeah, we'd like to do this. What do you think, you know, the interest is out there amongst our donors to a full-on proposal for a large grant?
Yeah. Great example. So certainly the development community has a lot to share across, and yet you need expertise in, you know, your particular area. And there's something you bring up, Maria, that's really important, is that if you think about this, this is a cumulative continuum. And what I mean by that is, so when someone says, hey, let's put a team together of our development professionals to go over after a big grant, it's going to be much, much more successful if we have already invested in the lateral communities. You know each other, you trust each other, you've talked already together, you have, you understand different people's expertise and can do that, or you've been meeting regularly. You know, we've all had the experience of being selected for a team. Congratulations, you're on the team, being sort of thrown into that pot. And you know, you've heard of, you know, forming, storming, norming kinds of things and all of that. Well, that uses up a lot of energy. Actually investing in these lateral communities and first allows you to really move fast. And when we think about organization agility and we think about how do we move fast, it's about making these investments kind of on the lower end of the continuum, so that when we need to actually get everyone aligned on something big, we can actually move a little faster. Great example, thank you. So, and it's fine to use all of these mechanisms. The key is to use it in the right place, right? So if we really need to make sure, let's use communication. You know, we need to really make sure that our communications team across the College of Natural Sciences is ready to be mobilized and has a set of protocols and templates that are used, let's say if we have an emergency or something that we really need to make sure that we are all on the same message about. Well, we probably need a wiring that's a little bit tighter here than a lateral community where it's like, hey, you know, why don't you share some best ideas and everybody sort of go do your own thing, but, you know, if you like what someone else is saying, you could pick that up. So it's about sort of situationally, but fit for purpose for the different kinds of work that you need to do. So again, as we go up, the strength of connection is stronger, but it's also more complex to manage. So we don't want to always just use a matrix, because that's really hard on the people who have to sit in those positions. It's 2 sets of meetings, it's 2 sets of communities and bosses and supervisors and objectives that are coming down, sometimes that are not always aligned. So we don't want to just use the matrix for everything if we can use a lighter touch. Great example. I see another one here in the chat. Aubrey, do you want to say a little bit more? Senior staff organizations, other colleges have various levels of relationships, networks, responsibilities that are super effective. Tell me what LASSO is.
It was merely an example of a lateral community that actually has varying levels of complexity up to between management processes and formal teams, because liberal arts has an organization that you're automatically a part of when you're senior staff, but you're never compelled to go to meetings. So there's a level of opt-in. So you there's a group mailing list where anyone and everyone in the group shares to do a hive mind, to share templates in case of things. Then there's monthly meetings, and there's subcommittees within the regular attendees of those to start for instance, addressing common issues that we see, or morale or budget, or whether or not people are getting resources that they need. And those subcommittees and the committee itself actually have a degree of reporting in terms of creating change or reinforcing positives at the college level. This was something I was involved in before I joined my current position. But I have actually been allowed to stay on it since having left, because it's such a valuable resource of humans and networks.
Cool. And Aubrey, are those monthly those monthly meetings and subcommittees, are those also completely voluntary?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I should say the membership is senior staff, only. However, senior staff are encouraged in certain areas to invite related parties in. So it's not a static group, but it's not a completely catch as catch can group either.
Yeah.
What,
but it's open. Yeah, and the idea there is, and I see your question, Heather, we'll just get to that, is that if it's voluntary, right? I give my time, it really is at that lateral community. Once I'm held accountable to show up on the fourth Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock for the meeting, then we've moved up, right? And so we want to be really clear about that. Heather had a question that just what are senior staff? Maybe, I guess we needed to clarify for folks. So.
I can answer that privately.
Okay.
Departmental admin managers or the highest level admin staff.
Good. Okay, before we move on, any questions, comments, other examples? These are great to hear. And again, the key in the design is a couple of reminders here, is it's not one is better than the other. It's fit the right amount of wiring and connection to the need. If we really need to make sure we're aligned, consistent, getting things done, something is about, there's a risk management element to it or a timeliness to it, then we probably need to move up a charter team or even dual reporting. Use the lightest touch possible though, right? Let's try to avoid that. And these are cumulative. We can't have an effective team or people working effectively across the matrix if we haven't invested in those interpersonal networks and high trust working relationships and good meeting and management routines and forums. So question, good. Can you elaborate on how the strength of connection increases with complexity? So yeah, so think about complexity as the management of these connections. So as we go up, let's say for a formal team, again, there's a complexity of, we need senior leadership to be setting boundaries, to be setting direction, to manage, to backfill the team members' time that they're giving to the teams. We need senior leaders to align on common priorities. What is the team doing? What does good look like? What kind of output do we want if we're bringing together a cross-functional or a cross-department team or a cross-college team? So all of a sudden, the complexity means it's not just the people who are involved in the conversation, the team itself, but we actually need to start making some changes and we have some impacts on the broader organization in order for that team to succeed. And so that's why we say that there's more complexity. Dual reporting. If I am the procurement manager for a department and I'm also reporting into a head of procurement for the college or for the university, well, now I need those leaders to actually set objectives together for me. They need to have performance management conversations about me. They need to align on my work if there are conflicts and trade-offs. So all of a sudden we've introduced more complex interactions into the system. And that's fine, but we want to make sure that, hey, the value of that dual reporting, that wiring together is worth, we're very clear on what we want to get out of that. And we're not just using the matrix, putting it in and adding that complexity without getting the value. All right, now I have a little poll for you. And so this is kind of looking ahead and thinking about the lateral communities that are going to be set up, because that's really where we're focusing here. I wanted to give you the whole continuum because you need to see where they sit in the kinds of relationships that you can have. But so I'm going to set up the poll and think about, for yourself personally, what would be the two most important benefits of making the effort to connect beyond my core team? Because as we said, these lateral communities start with discretionary effort, right? Showing up to do that. So let me open the poll. I'm going to launch the poll. So you should be able to do this, and we'll give it just a couple of minutes. So People are still voting. And what I'm going to ask is for a couple of people to volunteer thinking about some of these. What do you need to do? Or what are some good practices that you've seen when you've participated in these kinds of groups in the past that allow you to get these benefits? Just, we'll do a little bit of sharing. So think about that. I want to get a few examples from the group. So really very, very clearly, the number one thing is really to learn something new from others or find best practices. And I was struck when the dean said, you know, for many of the sort of jobs that we have at the university, and this is true in you know, corporate world as well, even in big organizations, there might just be one or two people. And doing that, and when we have that, then we need to be generalists. We need to be able to do everything, and it's very hard without having that mentorship, without having someone to ask an opinion of, to ask somebody to really have that community. I mean, that's why people in organizations, they love what we call functional structures, where I'm sitting in the IT group because my boss is, you know, a more experienced application developer than I am. My colleagues sitting to the right and left are have experience that I can call and can help me out. But when I'm the only one sitting there and I have to be the expert to everybody, it can be really lonely. So let me open that up. So let's get a hand or two, an example. When you've participated in these kind of lateral communities in the past, how do you make sure that you're learning from others? Or what would you suggest or think might work well to make sure that people get that benefit out of these? Catherine.
I'm a member of the Graduate Coordinators Network on campus, and we're a network of people who act as graduate coordinators for the different departments across campus. And frequently, we're the only person in our department who's coordinating a graduate program. Graduate coordination is incredibly complicated. You're working with many different offices across campus and trying to help students through like the web of bureaucracy, which is UT. And so the Grad Coordinators Network meets once a month. There's an executive committee that sets the meetings and brings in different offices, representatives from offices across campus to share information with graduate coordinators, to talk about upcoming changes, to remind people of processes, because frequently, you know, when you're getting onboarded as a graduate coordinator, there's a lot of learning you have to do from your peers in other departments. So the network sort of helps facilitate that. And it's a volunteer network, but it's a great way to connect with different people across campus, to one, be part of a community, and two, learn about the ins and outs of doing your job and navigating all of the different offices across campus.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you know, it's great to hear that, because then you can use that as a model, right? Other groups can use that as a model. What have you learned that works well? And I think in organizations, we often underutilize the concept of bright spots. We're often doing a lot of these things, but maybe others don't have visibility or know that, hey, the graduate coordinators have already had to solve this problem and have learned some things. So that's going to help other groups jumpstart. Great to hear. Other examples or other kind of just staying on that one about learning. What's going to be important when you come together in a group to make sure that those who want to learn something walk away and say, that was a good use of my time, I did learn something? Or maybe what's happened when you've joined a group where you thought you were going to learn something and then you walked away disappointed? What do we want to avoid? Any examples?
I'm Vivian. So I produce photo and video work, and I'm part of a very informal lateral group of videographers and photographers across UT. But my example is learning happened when we were able to gather and share our work. And that's when people would say, oh, how'd you do that? Or I'm doing a project similar and I need some help on how to execute it and things like that. So seeing other people's work, how they tackled things and showing examples and learning, that was the pros of the group. I think the negative was that it became difficult for everyone to gather and to have those times to share examples. And with the pandemic, we're definitely not gathering right now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Because what you say, Vivian, really leads into this next topic, which are some of the behavioral best practices that we know make these kinds of communities work. The beauty of them are they're low cost. You can meet virtually. It doesn't need a whole lot of university resources and time to make these happen. But they also really depend upon then that they're valuable to the people who participate and the energy is brought to them. So here's what we know make them work. They do need to be supportive, right? So this is different than the example someone gave earlier, which is, we're talking about a development. We'll walk down the hall and I see someone I know and I say, hey, can I talk to you about bounce an idea off? That's great, but that's really, really informal. This needs to be supported. So as someone else said, there's a list of all of the members, and it's great to know not just their names, but what are their roles, what's their experience, pictures, those kinds of things. So investing a little bit in kind of helping people first get connected, setting up the Zoom, getting the first meetings going, maybe if there is some other kind of support, when we can get back together, a little bit of food goes a long way to getting people to those meetings and or drinks in the afternoon. But what's really, really important here is they are not directed, right? Otherwise, we're moving into a management process or a formal team. So as soon as the bigger organization says, we really like you to come back with a recommendation on X, or we'd really like you to align on what policy we're going to use, we're in a different realm. And I think that's what's really, really important to make these work is to be very clear on what is the role of the larger organization in this lateral community, that it is supportive, but not directing. That said, it's also important for the larger organization, for the college, for the university, to be very clear on what this group is empowered to do. So let's say if the videographers got together and said, you know what, actually now that we all share notes, it would be so ideal if we could actually have some shared production, capability, and someone make an investment in that, and we want to do that. What if that comes out? Where does that recommendation go, right? So the large organization has to be very clear on kind of, what this group is set up to do, if they have recommendations, but not be directive. The second thing that we know, and Vivian's example there again, is you can't just show up. There still needs to be some planning and some organizing if you want them to work well. So the idea of let's all share some of our work. We're going to have a couple of examples. Well, that takes some preparation. There's a little bit of an agenda. So the group needs to really invest in self-organizing roles around setting up logistics, who's managing the agenda, who's going to facilitate, who's going to keep track of time. Without that, we've all been in the meeting that is badly managed and goes nowhere. And especially, I think when we try to do this virtually, what I have learned over the last 3 or 4 months is you need more discipline in a virtual environment to make sure that people participate, that they're heard, that they're included, that how we're going to manage the conversation. Are we going to raise our hand? Are we going to just jump in? Are we going to hear from everybody on a topic? Those kinds of things, this active management of the group dynamics goes so far just to have a better conversation. If we're 4 people, it's pretty easy. If we're 10 people, it's quite a bit more difficult. And so what people get out of it and the feeling, then actually it seems a little counterintuitive, but a little more discipline and structure actually make for a better conversation. So helping people personally connect and get to know each other, starting off the meetings with, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself, playing some silly icebreaker games, making sure, you know, then you start new meetings, just checking in with everybody, you know, what did you do for the holiday? What did you, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Equal participation using techniques like, hey, we're going to hear from everybody. Or after you make a comment, you're going to toss it to somebody and call on them. So I might say something and then I might say, you know, okay, I'm tossing it to Vivian, and then Vivian tosses it to Aubrey, and et cetera, et cetera. Using the polling like we just did to get a sense of, you know, where there's energy and what people want to talk about. Using breakout groups. You know, Zoom is terrific on that. You can set those up. You can pop right into a breakout group, and the value of 3 or 4 people talking about a topic together and then bringing it back if you have a bigger group of 15 or 20 works really nicely. And then also setting up sort of between meeting conversations, keeping the energy going for those who want to, right? Don't make work. Nobody needs more work to do, but keeping the energy going and making it easy, and again, finding some shared space for people to do that. And then finally, what we know is really the proactive engagement. These things have a life, and sometimes they live for a while, and then everybody kind of got what they needed out of it, and people stop showing up, or it's not compelling, or it's just kind of fades out, and that's okay. So we need to have participants in a lateral community that really, you know, put their all in, show up, participate, not be just passive observers, at least after the first time, not. But also, if, you know what, the group kind of says, there's nothing more we can get out of this, that's all right too. We can move on. So those are just a few things that that we've observed from these kinds of groups across all kinds of different organizations. And let me just open it up for sort of any comments, questions, any sort of broader kind of on any other sort of related topics as well. Again, and I would love to hear, you know, I think it's a wonderful idea that the college is doing this, and maybe here's also an opportunity while we've got the dean and some of your administrators on the phone, just what you hope to get out of this and what you would like to see. Yeah, okay, I see Sandra. Let's start with Sandra, and then we'll go to Dean Goldbart.
Hi, Amy. So my question is, I guess, what is, and since Dean Goldbart has his hand raised next, maybe he can also chime in on that. I'm just wondering what's kind of CNS's vision for this and plan for this, and does your role, Amy, end today after kind of like you present this idea to us and then we're kind of off to the races ourselves, or will there be other things that come from you, and then just kind of beyond that, CNS is clearly supportive of this because they've brought you in, and we're all here doing this, you know, because CNS put this together. But to what degree will CNS be encouraging our local chairs to be supportive of us participating in this kind of thing?
Those are great questions. The only one I can answer is that right now, this is all I'm doing, and I am going to turn it right over to the dean to answer all your other good questions.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Amy, and Sandra also and everybody for their thoughtful questions. To start my video, so I will. So what are we looking for? I think it's a really good and important question. I think for our staff, who are critical members of the team, without whom nothing the college does would be accomplished, what we're looking for is greater fulfillment, that people feel that what they are doing for science, mathematics and computing and education and research is fulfilling and rewarding, and one goes home at the end of the day or the end of the week filled with pride in what we're doing. I happen to think that what we do is about the most important thing in the world, and I want to share that with everybody. I really want people to feel supported, so that when they're in the midst of a task and there's an idea or a challenge that arises, that they have a sense of who to reach out for, who is their community, who do you go to, who you think, oh, that person may have thought about this issue already. How might I tackle it best? And so we create these communities of people who are sharing excellent practices, and also sharing change, because this may not appear this way from the outside, but the College of Natural Sciences is a very dynamic entity, interacting, for example, with complex organizations such as federal funding agencies, where the ideas and requirements and plans change by the day. And if our community can stay on top of those collectively, rather than having these sort of individual responsibilities, I think we'll be a richer, stronger organization. So fulfillment, support, sharing best practices, sharing expertise. There's tremendous expertise, but every now and again it's bottled up in an individual, when it could be handed off to others so that things could be taken on using the best skills that one another has discovered. And then, of course, there's this sense of community, which I think in many ways we feel acutely right now. One of the main reasons for going to work, of course, is the salary. But a very important one is also the sense of fulfillment of being part of a team and a community. So that's tremendously important. And if we can foster that both online and when we return to campus in due course, that will also be important. And lastly, I think Sandra very wisely, as usual, raised the issue of the role of the chairs. And I'll just comment very briefly that I think we are arriving at a new model in the College of Natural Sciences, where the chairs really emerge as leaders, not as, I will say, mere representatives of the voice of their department. So they really live on a kind of continuous axis between the dean's office and the department, kind of shuttling back and forth. And in that role as leaders, not just representatives, I think they have a much better position to help shape the culture and participate in figuring out how the culture should be shaped by signaling back and forth what's happening in the departments and what is happening in the dean's office back and forth. So those are my hopes and dreams for this, that we end up with support, fulfillment, and shared expertise. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other closing questions? And I would really underscore, you know, in large organizations, it's always about the both and you're always trying to find the benefit of being big is you've got all this expertise and it is often trapped in places and not made visible. And this is one start to really create that visibility. So there's huge benefit for the college as well as the individual. And, you know, when you can find something that benefits both, that's really a win. Sandra, closing thought.
And my question is, again, I think this is maybe more something that CNS folks can answer, but Amy, you might have some insight too. And it's that, you know, one of the complications of the University of Texas at Austin in terms of our job titles is they're very inconsistent. And so when creating, you know, this type of lateral community where the affinity is based on the type of work that we do, I think that the messaging has to be very careful so that the targeted folks are actually receiving the messaging and knowing that they're targeted and not just randomly receiving it, since our job titles are so varied.
Yep. And I'll just give you 15 seconds on that. Very important. The more you want to integrate an organization, the more you need actually consistency in what we call the vertical organization, which is about the job titles and hierarchies. So when we work with PepsiCo and they want to create a global marketing council, if a director of marketing doesn't mean the same thing across geographies, we can't actually find the right people or have them show up or have credibility with one another in that way. And so actually that kind of thing, which seems kind of silly, it becomes really important when you're trying to connect laterally. This has been really fun. I'm excited about what you're doing and that you're all now org designers. I wish you all the best with it.
Well, thank you, Amy. Maybe I'll just make one or two remarks to wrap things up. First, let me really thank everybody for attending, and not just attending, but for really engaging. I'm not surprised, but I'm delighted. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Amy, of course, enormously stimulating, enormously suggestive of what we can do. And right at the beginning, you said, why leave things to chance? And I think that's exactly the right question. We shan't. We really want today's conversation to signal the start of a new, really intentional effort to strengthen connections across our college community. And I'm confident that we will, and that we'll emerge stronger. I want to just take 1 minute to really thank everybody for all they do across the college. You're working in extraordinary time, and you continue to astonish me daily, and I'm very grateful for that. And lastly, if you ever had any doubt about the importance of the work that you do right here in UT's College of Natural Sciences, you need only look in today's Washington Post for an account of the discovery right here in College of Natural Sciences of the shape of the coronavirus spike protein, which led to the very first human COVID-19 vaccine to be tested anywhere in the world. Or Monday's segment on the NBC Today show on research from CNS on antibodies done using llamas. No llamas were hurt during those experiments, which may well keep people from getting COVID-19. So it's really true what they say, what starts here protects the world. Be well, take care, and we'll talk soon. Thanks very much, everybody.